We did have a great hearing. We have set in 2 hearings, the one in Redding and the one in Fairfield, the exact kind of level of evidence that we need to beat these autocrats. CARB is probably the most arbitrary, the most pig-headed, the least thinking state agency that I've ever come in contact with. And I thought that the Department of Transportation of Texas would always take that record, but they pale in insignificance. These people are beyond a doubt the worst examples of public servants that I've ever seen, because they don't understand that they're public servants. You're their servants. You do what they want and what they say. And over we heard in evidence the fact that a CARB representative said to a truck driver, "We do what we want to. We do it because we can do it." Before I get to the big guns, let me just tell you a few of the due process violations that we were able to prove in Fairfield. There's a man who has one of the low mileage trucks, and he made the awful mistake of not filing his certification papers at the right time. They always had been due about the 15th of March, and he didn't realize that they had changed it to the 1st of the year. And so he came in and in March, about 5 days before they were usually due, and they said, "You're too late. But we can still let you sign up, but you're going to have to pay a fine." And he said, "Okay, how much is the fine?" They said, "Well, we don't know. We haven't set it yet." And he said, "Well, when will you set it?" "Well, we'll get around to it." "How much do you think it will be?" "Oh, from $1,000 to $3,000. And he says, "Well, you're going to have a board meeting to set it." "Oh, no, the staff will set it." The United States Supreme Court 85 years ago said that a person to be fined or receive a criminal sentence of any kind has to know in advance that what he's doing is wrong, specifically has to know. It can't be any way doubtful, and he has to know what the penalty will be. Well, here's one. He didn't know he was doing wrong, and they still don't know what the penalty will be because they haven't set it yet. It's such a clear violation of due process that it shows me that these folks don't give a darn about the Constitution of the United States or of California, because California's Constitution has the same requirements. We had evidence of due process violations from the standpoint of CARB representatives climbing onto a man's truck, looking under the hood with no probable cause, none whatsoever, and giving him tickets for not being in compliance. This fellow thought that he could do even more. He came over to him and he said, "Open your hood." And the driver said, "No, not for you, I'm not." And he said, "You don't have a badge." And the CARB man said, "Well, that guy does." And he pointed to a highway patrolman. And the driver said, "If he tells me, I'll listen, but I'm not listening to you." And he said, "And you don't have a gun, so you're not going to look under my hood." Well, this fellow has a gun. He said, "But he's a highway patrolman." So finally the patrolman said to him, "Open the hood." And this guy clambers up there. It's a violation of a Supreme Court decision that is so clear. In fact, it was won by one of my friends in Idaho for a small businessman in Pocatello, Idaho. OSHA doesn't have to have a warrant to come into your business, but they have to have, according to the Supreme Court, some reason that they can articulate that says that there's something they at least suspect. Thank you, Terry. for wanting to go in. This guy had nothing, absolutely nothing. But it's kind of interesting that they were waiting, 2 CARB men were waiting at the scales when this truck came in. These folks had been at the courtroom in Willows when the judge made his decision to deny the motion to dismiss. And they were on either video or television, I don't remember which, and they wear shirts with the name of their trucking company on them. And all of a sudden, within 2 weeks, CARB has 2 representatives at those scales waiting for this truck. I infer they were waiting for this truck. Everybody's afraid of these people. They're scared to death of them. We had a radio program, a talk show host who has, I guess, 1,000 or so radio stations or thousands of people who listen at least. And he had a show in which he criticized Miss Mary, and he got suspended from the air for 6 months, Pete?
Yeah, 6 months from YouTube.
From YouTube, suspended from YouTube for a 6-week period for conducting harmful activities. And the only thing harmful that he knew that he did was criticize Her Majesty. Now, when that happens, the First Amendment means nothing to them. But let us tell you where we're going next and what Pete and I think we have. All the evidence is in. The record's being held for 2 weeks in case somebody wants to put something in writing about an incident that's happened to them or a violation. We're going to have some evidence come in about the amounts of pollution that come from other sources. The amount of pollution, for example, some of the evidence that's coming in will show the amount of pollution that comes on the cross-current wind from China, the big portion of the pollution of California. We've got other sources of pollution that come into the state. So why then do they take on the diesel trucks and the diesel equipment instead of using their power to put leverage on the President of the United States, who's of the same party, and stop some of the pollution that's coming from other countries? Well, they don't do that for 2 reasons. First of all, they can't because China won't listen to the president or them. And you can't push China too much when you owe them more money than you've got. The second thing is there is an agenda that they're fighting for. And that agenda happens to have a number connected with it, but I won't talk about that because people just think I'm a conspiratorialist when I talk about Agenda 21 or whatever it is. But that's the agenda. The agenda is to control people and control their activities, control where they operate, control where they live, control their water. And that's why they're going after the little guy. They're going after those little businesses that they think they know they don't have the wherewithal to comply, and they don't think they have the wherewithal to fight them. And so we hope we're going to come out of the wings in the dark and surprise them. And if we do, we're going to surprise them in several ways. They have told the Congress, along with EPA, that exposure to these diesel fumes and the soot that comes out is deadly. They have told them that the slightest exposure to them can kill you instantly. Or it can cause cancer, it can cause all the other types of diseases, asthma. It can make you sick over a period of time and you die. But they're deadly. And they said that to get money to run their campaign to put diesel trucks off the road. Their goal is electric vehicles, and they've said so. And they've set aside $50 million as seed money to be used for anybody who can invent an electric vehicle that's viable. There isn't even one in existence. But they've set aside money for somebody to invent one, and that's the goal, getting to that, getting rid of diesel fuel, oils of all kind, all over the country. Coal is under attack. At the same time, they're getting that money from the federal government because of the deadly nature of this soot. They're conducting experiments on human beings, exposing them to this to try to show that they can harm them, because they can't prove the harm through other research. Now, they haven't told the people that they're conducting the experiments on that this stuff is deadly. Otherwise, they might not do it for $12 an hour. $20 for the children. Children as young as 10 years old have had soot ingested into their noses of an amount equivalent to being exposed for 2 days in Los Angeles. And nowhere in the consent form does it say we're going to ingest some deadly material into your nose for $20. Well, here's the interesting thing. California law says there shall be no physical experiments on children under 16 years of age, with or without consent, and with or without consent of their parents. So they have violated California law by conducting the experiments. And if they really are exposing them to deadly material, they're committing assault with intent to murder under California case decisions. So one way or the other, they're wrong. They got federal money for the testing. So one way or the other, they have fraudulently obtained money from the federal government. And there are laws that say that if you do that, you're in violation of federal law. In fact, you've committed a federal crime. So whichever position they take, we can prove that they've committed a crime. We can also prove that they have violated the law, both in California and federal law, about the experiments on children. So we hope we have them in a trap that shows that they have committed a crime. Now, conducting those experiments on humans is also a violation of the Nuremberg Code that was reached by agreement of all nations in the world after the Second World War. The Nuremberg Code led to the Common Code, which is now federal law. It's in every agency's regulations, and it's in state law. So they have violated that law by conducting the types of experiments that we abhorred when the Nazis did them. You've done it in California. Your own state government and its appointees have done exactly what the fascists did after the Second World War that caused every nation in the world to say it'll never happen again. Medical schools in North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, and in six foreign medical schools, 10 in America and 6 in foreign lands, conducted these experiments. And nobody in law enforcement has done anything about it, even though they've been notified of it. USC and UCLA in California conducted the experiments on children, and nobody in law enforcement has done anything about it. So we asked the hearing board, both in Reading and in Fairfield, and they'll be combined in the final decision, to send their findings to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office and insist that they investigate and file charges against USC, UCLA, and Miss Mary and her board at CARB. We also asked that the same be requested of the Attorney General of California and the Sacramento County District Attorney and the United States Attorney General, whoever that is right now. There's somebody acting, we just aren't sure who it is. Now, will anything come of that? Probably not, except for one thing. It will get the attention of the world when that happens. And we'll see that law enforcement in the state, very likely, will not do anything about it. That'll help us in court when we get there. So I think it's a win-win. If they do something about it, fine. If they don't, fine, because Mr. Peters and I hopefully will push that down their throat when we get into court. As a matter of fact, I'll say this now because I'll probably forget it later. In my thinking today, we can link that into a conspiracy on the part of the government of California to violate these laws. And if we can link it into that conspiracy, and we do, and we can take it back the number of years necessary because we proved that on Saturday. Anybody ever heard of the law called RICO? The Racketeering Act. It's never been held valid against a government agency. But hopefully CARB can make history. And I can't think of a better group to make it and to be charged with racketeering than this group. Think of what they've done. Think of what they've done other than what I've already talked about. They impose a fine of $500,000. Or at least they say the fine's going to be $500,000 unless you don't fight us. If you don't fight us, then we'll let you get by with $225,000. And so what does the company do? They pay $225,000. What would that be called if it weren't CARB doing it, if it weren't a state agency doing it? Extortion, maybe? Well, we can call it that and see what happens in court. I think it is. I think it's another violation of due process of law. So when we get these findings done, and I talked to a chief of staff of one of the important members of Congress who's on the Appropriations Committee today, and he wants us to have that decision back to Congress by the 30th of March. And I don't think I've told Pete that before. So that means findings for both hearings. And Carol and I decided this afternoon that in view of that, we're not going to try to go back to Idaho and then come back. So we're just going to stay here until we get it done and we can get it off to the DA, to all the people we're sending it to. But in addition, it is going to the Appropriations Committee in Washington. And what we requested the hearing board do is ask them to cut all appropriations to EPA that have anything to do with California and make sure that the law says that no funds will come to CARB from the Congress of the United States. What that'll mean is that I suppose that the methane tax that they impose, and maybe a barbecue tax when they get around to that, will have to go to make up that money, but it'll make it tough for them, and that's what we have to do. When you find corrupt, and I claim they're corrupt, and I'm not saying necessarily that they're taking money, they're corrupt because they're corrupting the system. They're corrupt because they're violating the law. They're doing what you can't do. You can't violate the law and get away with it. And when they do that, they're corrupting the system. So I say they're a corrupt organization. Why do I say that, and why will I try to prove that? Because that's another section of RICO. And there are cases that say that corruption doesn't necessarily mean taking a bribe or taking money. It can be corruption that destroys a business. It can be corruption that destroys a system. And I think we can make that case out. We'll send a copy. We've asked the board to send a copy, to have us send a copy of these findings to the Energy Oversight Committee. And one of the things that I really, really long for is to see Senator Sessions of Alabama interviewing Gina McCarthy about these things that are now proven, the things that a week ago she continued to say to him, I don't know, I don't have that information. Well, he will have it this time, and I'm sure he'll make it available to her so that she has it before he questions her. Now all these things are opportunities. They're new opportunities to attack. So far, the only case that's still alive is the case in Glenn County. The case that was filed on interstate commerce on the constitutional principle has been dismissed both at the district court level and at the circuit court of appeals level. And frankly, I'm going to tell you I predicted that. Because when you go into a federal court with nothing but a constitutional principle, you're going to lose. But that's not what we're going in with. We're going in showing that they have failed to coordinate with local governments. And we now have, I think it's 11 or 12 local governments that have been involved in these hearings. And every one of them answered my question when I said, have they met with you to coordinate? The answer was no. And then, to prove coordination, didn't happen. CARB requested that the Court of Appeals hold that they were part of the EPA project, that they weren't acting as a state agency. They were acting as part of the EPA's federal scheme. And the court agreed with them. Why did they say they wouldn't coordinate with the city of Redding? Because they weren't a federal agency. Because they weren't operating in a federal scheme. And now in their own pleadings in the Ninth Circuit, they've said, yes, we were. So no coordination? You better believe it. They have not coordinated. They've failed to, and they've even said so now in a court of law. If we get, there are only 5 cases that have ever gone into court where coordination has been the main issue right up front. And in all 5, the courts have held that the agency did not coordinate. And what was the result? Whatever the agency had done to that time had to be withdrawn, and they went back to the beginning and started over. It happened with the Bruno Hot Springs snail in Idaho. I think I've told you about that, so I won't talk about that microscopic snail anymore. It happened here in California when the state of California, with Governor Brown acting as Attorney General at the time, claimed that the Forest Service had not coordinated with the state in finishing up their forest plan. The court in Northern California, in the Northern U.S. District of California, said, that's right, you haven't coordinated, so you throw your plan out and you go back and start over. Now, and in the city of Rancho Cordero, the city, in its plan, had used coordination, requiring Fish and Wildlife to coordinate with the city. And then the city didn't coordinate. So the federal agency came in and used the law, and the judge said, you didn't coordinate, your plan is out, you go back and start over. Same thing happened with the Bruno Hot Springs snail, and the same thing happened with a plan for wild horses on the public lands in Utah, in Uintah County versus the BLM. There are two other cases involving water users in Northern California where coordination becomes part of the decision. The decision rested on another point, but the court emphasized the requirement that the coordination take place. That's why the Department of Justice, when I have had to write to them to say this agency is not coordinating, and I write the threat to sue, the Department of Justice contacts the agency, and in a few days they say to the local government, boy, you must have misunderstood us. We intended to coordinate with you all along. And then they come and do it. The Department of Justice wants no more losses. Because the thing about a loss in coordination is more people hear about it. More local governments hear about it. And more people then use it. You talk about people, and Terry's right, about people not knowing what CARB is. Talk to them about coordination. Go to a meeting of the California Association of Counties and talk about coordination and look at the blank stares. They don't know, they have no idea what authority and power Senator Packwood made possible for them when he put that requirement in the law. Those 4 little towns in Texas, population 1,600 total, stopped the most massive agency that I'd ever seen until CARB. The Department of Transportation in Texas has its own Air Force. I don't remember how many planes they have, but everybody who travels there travels in one of their planes to somewhere in the state. They never would give me a ride in it when we were down there fighting, but they flew to the places of the hearings, and we had to drive. The budget of that department down there is the same as Southwest Airlines' budget for a year. And I really thought they were the toughest until this. But those 4 little towns used coordination once they found out about it. And let me tell you how quickly they picked up on it. They asked me to come down and talk to them about it, and I talked for about as long as I've talked now. And one of the mayors said, what do we have to do this? He said, where's the paper? Let's sign it right now, let's do it. And the others were ready. I said, no, you've got to go have your city council vote to do it. You've got to do this the right way. We'll just tell them after we sign it. Let's get started. Let's get started. I said, no, now you're doing what they do. The very next meeting, they signed it. Why is it that so many local governments, you explain it and you explain it and you explain it, and they still won't do it? Well, that's a mystery for another day. Pete and I won't try that, I guess, during this one. We'll just take on one thing at a time. But in Arizona, the state of Arizona passed a law that requires any local government to coordinate on a petition filed by a group of at least 10 citizens. If 10 citizens go into the city of Phoenix and say, we insist that you coordinate on this agency rule, the city of Phoenix has to do it or hold a public hearing and explain why they won't. One town in Arizona did that, and they had their public hearing and they explained why they wouldn't, and the councilmen were replaced at the next election. So, and that statute's a model statute now. It almost passed in Montana, it passed one house. But it's come to that because local government has that authority and has that power, and that's what we're going to use to get into court. And once we're there, then we're going to use all of this evidence of the violation of law and the violation of due process. And let me tell you something that people don't understand. Carol and I came through the checkout stand in Walmart the other day, and I don't think she's in here, so I can say it. My wife loves to talk. Oh, God. Well, she does. She heard me, but she does. And so she has to tell this lady that she used to live in California. She doesn't now. She lives in Idaho. The lady said, "You're here on vacation?" She said, "No, we're here fighting CARB to try to save the truck drivers." And she said, "Fighting what?" She had never heard of it, didn't know what it was. Her stepsons that we've spent a lot of time with while we've been here had no idea. And now they both think that this is a communist regime, now that they've looked at some of the things they do. But they had never heard of it. Well, imagine if Californians haven't heard of it, imagine the rest of the nation. They have not the slightest clue, and they have to have it. We have to make sure over the next couple of weeks that somehow we get the word out, as Terry said, to the nation, so that people understand that you don't have to be driving a diesel truck in California to be hurt by what CARB's doing. You folks are going to pay more money for everything you buy if this rule stays in effect and goes through to its finality. Everything you buy, a magazine, you're going to pay more. A piece of meat, you're going to pay more. Some things you aren't going to have. You aren't going to have fresh oysters at times because you won't be able to get the trucking that's needed to get them there quick enough to be sold to you. Some of the big companies hustled into compliance because they could afford to, and they thought that's the way to stay in good with the state and just keep working. Let's just comply with this, even though it's wrong, even though it's unconstitutional, let's comply. They're not out of the woods. Do you think these people will stop once they get rid of these little companies? No, they won't, because they're after diesel. They're not after just the little guy. They're after diesel. They want diesel off the road. So the big companies that think, we don't really have a dog in this fight, we're okay, we're in compliance, one morning are going to wake up and they're going to be just like the owners of the barbecues who got the news that they have to be compliant with CARB to start up your barbecue in your backyard. They're going to find out that they're coming for them next. I tell you that their goal is the electricity, and the president has said so. Now, why did EPA give one waiver? Under the law, under the Clean Air Act, the EPA has the authority to give a state a waiver from complying with their rules. They give that state the freedom to go further than they go. Why did they do that in California? Why do you think maybe they didn't do it in Idaho? It would be far easier. There are far fewer truckers to deal with in Idaho. But there's also people that would be standing at the scales making sure that the IARB, if it were in Idaho, wouldn't be checking under the hood of any trucks. They chose California because of liberalism. They chose California because of the party that's in control. And they chose California because the redistricting that took place managed to restrict you folks up here to the lowest representation ratio for a populated area in the Congress of the United States. They picked California because they thought it would be easier here. It would be easier to get it done with a Democratic legislature and with Governor Brown and with the two people, McCarthy and Mary, who were in the EPA when the felon drew out of the clear blue air the standard that's imposed on you. He had no science at all. All he was trying to do was get in good with the people that ran EPA. And Gina McCarthy and Mary were in the office. They were the operating chiefs who had to approve his 2.5 when he pulled him out of the air. And how did he come up with it? Well, he looked at what they wanted. He looked at the fact that they wanted to get rid of diesel, and then he started figuring, and he went down to the level that he could guarantee that they could get rid of it, and he wrote it up in a paper with no support whatsoever. He got promoted, he got an award, and then he was later put in prison because he quit coming to work after he had gotten all this praise. And he claimed he was an agent of the CIA, so he didn't have to come to work. And he drew his pay for 2 years from EPA, never reporting to his office. Now that's the fraudulent guy that invented the standard that they're imposing here in California. And then on this end, the statistician that did the work to make it work for CARB, PhD in statistics, cost him only $1,000 as he bought it from a storefront publisher of certificates. You would think that he would have been fired too, but he's working at the California Davis for $98,000 a year salary. So fraud was on both ends of the setting of the standard that you're having to comply with. We heard evidence at the hearing that the tests, the smoke tests that were done, every trucker that testified had a percentage of soot, of polluted emission, less than what the rule calls for that CARB put out. Much less. I remember one that he would have been allowed something like 52% or 50%, and he had 17, I believe. So they went to CARB and they said, well, look, we're less than what your rule calls for, so why do we have to put the filter on? And one of the witnesses that I'll never forget said he asked that, and the CARB man said, because you don't have a filter. And he said, but my score's better than what you insist on. You don't have a filter. But I've got 17%, and I could pass with 50%. You don't have a filter. Over and over and over. And finally, we had a witness testify that what they said once the filter got kind of old was, we expect 0 emissions. So here is a regulation that sets the percentage, and when a trucker comes under that, he's told, we expect 0 emission, and there's no regulation and no law on the books that requires it. And why do they say they can do that? Because we can. Because we can do what we want to. So to the big trucking companies, God bless you. When they come for you, I don't imagine a lot of the independent truckers that have gone out of business will be very sorry for you. And all the other people in California, all the other organizations that know what's going on, they're going to suffer. They're going to suffer higher prices. They're already paying more for gasoline than they would have to at any other state because of the gas tax that was raised. This rule will hurt every person in California. Every person living in California, from the person on food stamps to the person that lives in the biggest mansion in the state. Everybody will be harmed by this rule. Economically harmed, not to mention constitutionally harmed, because your constitutional rights will be gone. My Lord, if they can do this under a diesel regulation, why can't they do it? If they can wipe out the First Amendment, if they can put a radio show off YouTube for 6 months because of criticism of a state employee, what's left of the Constitution in California? And the EPA has plans. You can read it when the president said, I want something, when you waive the rule for a state, I want something that can be applied nationally. I want something that will help me meet my obligation that I committed to China. Because he committed to making a higher reduction in pollution than he insisted that China make. And he needs something to make that happen in the next 18 months. So he said, when you do it for one state where you make the waiver, do it so that it can be applied nationally. If California's is finally approved by a court, every state in the Union will be subjected to this. And every person in the United States will be subjected to economic harm as well as all of the constitutional harm that you're looking at right now. We have to get the word to the people. We have to stop this. We've got to stop it now. It can be stopped. There's nothing that government does that can't be stopped. This nation stopped one of the most effective and efficient and powerful militaries in the history of the world. The armies and navies of the Japanese Empire. And we stopped them even though we suffered a tremendous loss on the first day of that war. My brother was on one of the landing ships that went into every island as MacArthur took back the Pacific. And how did he take it back? And this is a lesson that I really urge you to pay attention to as we move forward trying to get into court. Step by step, one step at a time. He took one island after another, and he never looked ahead to the next island until he took the one that was right in front of him. That's what we have to do. We have to take this thing step by step, never assume we're going to win, even though neither Pete or I haven't known him very long, but he doesn't like to lose. And I sure as hell don't like to lose. One of the things that I said to a friend today is, always in my criminal practice, I would have preferred to win and get no money than to lose and get paid $50,000. We aren't going to lose this case, providing we can get the support from people that we need to pay for the lawsuit. Because neither he or I have that kind of cash in our pockets. In fact, his income and mine from the hearing on Saturday was, I think, zero. His and mine for the hearing in Reading was zero. So we're not going to get rich on it. But we can't afford to pay for the injunction action. We have to get enough money in support from the people to pay for that action if we go into court, and we will win. As Mark Block, a member of our board, said when he testified on Saturday, These guys are going to whip their ass. Now, he knows something about fighting. He was chief of staff for Herman Cain during the last campaign. But folks, you have to help. You can't just sit. You know, the psychological theory, I've been wondering for a long time, what explains the fact that people will sit and watch the fight go on when it affects them? And I came across the bystander concept, the bystander syndrome. The syndrome was developed in New York when the lady was murdered and 38 people stood by and watched it. Well, later on, they found out that the press was wrong. There weren't 38 people who actually watched, but there were a number of people. And the psychologists began to work on a theory. And what they did was conduct experiments, and they found that the more people there are in a room watching somebody apparently being attacked, the less likely they are to help. They become bystanders. If they're in that room, one or two, and they see something happening, they're more apt to intervene and try to help the victim. And Pete, we saw that in the testimony of the two men that stopped and got the children out of the burning bus, the burning school bus. And they asked, why did you do that? Well, I had to. I had to stop and get those kids out of that bus. Two men got them all out. The bystander syndrome is present in California. There are too many people who are willing to sit back and say, let's watch this, and let's hope that the good guys win. If 40,000 people, that's not many, not even for California, but for the nation, gave $10, we would have enough to take this case to the Supreme Court. And it will go to the Supreme Court. No matter who loses, the first round will go to the Court of Appeals, and no matter who loses there, will go to the Supreme Court. Because it means too much. It means too much to us because of the destruction of the American system in California, and it means too much to CARB because they intend to destroy the American system in California. $10, 40,000 people. My bet is that, and we're going to start in earnest trying to get that this week. My bet is that we get it, but I've always been an optimist. I want you to remember something. It's something, and then I'm going to quit, and I think I've given you all of the, and I can't give it in the excitement that we felt as this evidence came in, but as each bit of this evidence came in and we saw the development of those criminal charges, the evidence that will develop those criminal charges, that will develop RICO. As we saw those come in, it was an exciting day. Very exciting. And it's hard to reproduce that. I urge you to watch the videos when they're ready. You'll be astounded at the testimony that was given. But I think we'll get that money. And I'm probably wrong. Because every time I have ever believed that the grassroots people would come up with enough money to take the action to win, they haven't. We've had to do it without it. But I'm going to end right here with what I said at the end of my argument to the hearing panel the other day. Paraphrasing Winston Churchill, which is always dangerous because his words were so carefully chosen. What he said was, if we lose, if we fail, our friends in the United States and France will fall into a great abyss akin to the Dark Ages. But if we hold firm and we win, if Great Britain survives 1,000 years, they will always say this was their greatest day. And that's what will happen here if we win. if California and the United States survive for 1,000 years, everybody who participates in this fight, 1,000 years from now, people will say this was their finest hour. They saved the United States of America, the only republic ever in the history of the world that was founded by people who believed that God was with them and that it was God's intention that the republic be founded. Well, if it was his intention then that it be founded, surely it must be his intention now that we all save it. And that's what we'll do if we get the support. Thank you very much, and I ask you, get to your friends, get to everybody, no matter how well you know them, and get them to support what we're going to do. Thank you.